ours, correct? Lord, may the words on my lips and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable unto you this day, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. Pastor talks about his wife who is auditing a theological class. Now, to audit a class means that you pay for the course, pay for the books, you go to class, but you don't write the tests, you don't do the homework, and you certainly don't do the exam. But at the same time, you don't wind up getting credit for the course that you take either. The pastor reflected on his wife doing this, and the pastor writes, many Christians come to church on Sunday mornings and audit the sermon. They go to class, they have their textbook in hand and listen to the professor, but all they want to do is audit the class. They don't want to be expected to do any homework. They don't want to pass any tests that God sends their way to check their progress. These Christians will pay the money to take the class, but they don't want to meet any requirements. They also don't expect to receive a degree or a diploma from the school. And then later he adds, as long as my wife audits her class, she'll have no credit on her transcript, there will be no graduation ceremony, nobody will ever hand her a degree, and as long as you audit your Christian life, there will be no passing grades, there will be no divine recognition, and there will be no experience of your calling. The text for today is addressed to those who are auditing the Christian life, not kind of getting fully immersed in it. I remember when I was at theological college, and much of what we did at theological college, we were in large classrooms for some of them, with an awful lot of students, with a professor in the distance, and I often felt that we were talking about religion instead of being involved in it. This is what Jesus is talking about in our text today, for those that are auditing the Christian faith. It's a continuation of the text that we had a look at last week when Jesus asks his disciples, who do you say that I am? And it was Peter, of course, we talked about last week, who said that you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus' response to him was, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by the Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. So, today, our lesson follows on the heels of that. And Jesus explains to the 12 disciples about going to Jerusalem, that he has to go to Jerusalem. He has to suffer in the hands of the priests, the scribes, and the teachers of the law, meaning the Sanhedrin, the court, the official court. And that he is going to be killed, and that he is going to rise on the third day. Peter takes particular offense at this kind of teaching of Jesus, and says to him that, never, Lord, this will never happen to you. The surprising thing about Peter's response to Jesus saying, this is what is going to happen to me, is that Peter, just a few sentences earlier, has declared that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. So for Jesus to say, no, you're wrong about this, is quite remarkable. Peter means well. He doesn't want his friend Jesus to die. Certainly doesn't want him to suffer, and doesn't want him to die. Jesus' response is pretty harsh. He says, right away, he says, get behind me, Satan, you are a stumbling block to me. You don't have in mind the things of God, but the things of man, or the things of this world. And we're reminded at the time that he was in the wilderness, that Jesus was in the wilderness, and the devil came to him and offered him to have the glories without the work, without the suffering. And here Peter is suggesting the same thing. Like I said, Peter means well when he does that. Then Jesus turns and he speaks to the rest of the disciples. including those of us who are auditing his teachings and auditing the Christian life. If anyone would come to me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. What good would it be for a man if he gains the whole world and yet loses his soul? So Jesus says, first of all, he says, whoever wants to be my disciple must first deny themselves. Denying ourselves is not something that we're used to doing in our world. Worldly wisdom says to get as much as you can, as quickly as you can, for yourself. It's interesting, I remember my parents stories about my parents when they first got married. Of course, a car didn't come with the marriage. Even the house didn't come with the marriage. The television set certainly didn't come with the marriage. That all came as they saved and as they had the money to do so. When Janice and I got married, we pretty much had most of that stuff when we got married. Our kids have got most of that stuff right now. We want as much as we can, as quickly as we can. But Jesus is saying we need to deny ourselves. We need to put our personal desires aside, saying no to those personal desires, saying yes to God and to God's direction in our life. Another sign that we had in front, you might remember it, was if God is your co-pilot, you need to change seats. My son Josh has recently given up float planes and is now on what they refer to as wheel planes. He's now with a division of Central Mountain Air as a junior pilot. He's here for the weekend. Told me that he's working with a senior pilot, 67 years of age, with 30 years experience with Central Mountain Air. And I said to him, well, how long has this guy been flying? And Josh says, I don't know, forever. Mind of a 27-year-old. So wouldn't it be funny if Josh got into the plane and took the left-hand seat right away and had this veteran pilot of flying forever in the co-pilot seat? But that's often what we do when we decide that we know better than God and we want to have God in the plane with us maybe for a little bit of security, a little bit of extra safety measure, but really we want to be in control. If that's the way that you're living, you need to change seats. You need to have God as your pilot, not your co-pilot. Well, secondly, Jesus says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, and secondly, take up their cross. What does he mean, take up their cross? Often I'll wear, don't have it on today, but I'll wear a little cross around my neck. The cross signifies something a whole lot larger. Nothing wrong with wearing a cross. There's just a whole lot of people, we have the next slide, a whole lot of people wearing crosses that, maybe are not doing it for the right reasons. So if you're wearing a cross, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're in tight with your Christian faith. Just wearing the cross itself doesn't mean very much, especially in today's society. Taking up your cross and following Jesus means that you're willing to walk the Christian talk. You're willing to change your priorities. You're willing to make sacrifices. You're willing to allow God to be in control. Are you willing to follow Christ's teaching in your life regardless of the cost? Are you willing to make a monetary sacrifice? Are you willing to make a sacrifice of your time? Are you willing to allow yourself to be rejected sometimes by those that you love, by friends, by family, by co-workers, because of your faith? Are you committed to being a disciple of Jesus Christ and to carry on those commitments as best as you can? In today's society, people are reluctant to get really committed to anything. I found, as much as when I was a Boy Scout and how I think character forming that was for me, couldn't talk my kids into joining Boy Scouts. Just didn't want to make that commitment. We had the same problem in Rotary, trying to get people to commit, particularly to commit long term, to stay with it. I don't know how many people have joined Rotary in the last 13 years that I've been part of Rotary, and you'll even more for yourself. How many people have come and gone? People just don't want to commit anymore. Same is true in the church. People just don't want to make that kind of commitment. Do you know, last century, in the 20th century, the opposite was true of the missionary movement. There were some great Christian role models that took for very serious those words of Jesus, take up your cross and follow me. And Albert Schweitzer is one that stands out really very much in my mind, that missionary physician. And he tells a story of telling his family about serving and going to serve in Africa. At that time, he had a brilliant young future in Germany. He was a great pianist and intellectual. He had a fabulous career ahead of him as a doctor in Germany. The good life awaited him. But one morning he awoke and he decided that he needed to give back to the world, that he had been very blessed and he needed to give back to the world. And the way that he wanted to give back to the world was to be a missionary physician. His family told him he was crazy. There was a lot of battles that were fought at the dining room table. They berated him for his decision to become a missionary, to leave Germany, to leave all that he had, and to go to Germany to become a missionary. And their conclusion was that he had lost his mind. They felt, in the end, that he had lost his mind, that he would give all of that up to go to Africa, to be a nobody. But in reality, he became a very respected physician in Africa. While he was at home, before he left, the way that they treated him, he described as affectionate ridicule. Affectionate ridicule. But the Albert Schweitzers of this world are the ones that make the difference in the world. Now, you don't need to be brilliant. You don't need to be the most talented. You just need to be willing to follow the steps that Christ puts in front of you. And not compromise. Be willing to take a stand and to take a firm stand. And Rosa Parks is one that I think is a fabulous example of this. Famous civil rights activist, as you know. Not somebody that's noted for her brilliance or for her talent in particular, but she was willing to risk her all. She was willing to stand up for her rights and to make her rights known and to suffer the consequences for that. So as you know, she refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white person, as was the law at the time, hard as that is to believe. 1955, that was the state that of the legal and cultural understanding at that time. And she was arrested for her defiance. And she writes, when I sat down on the bus that day, I had no idea that history was going to be made. I was only thinking of getting home. But I had made up my mind after so many years of being the victim of the mistreatment that my people suffered, not giving up my seat and whatever I had to face afterwards was not important. I didn't feel any fear sitting there. I felt the Lord would give me the strength to endure what I had to face. It was time for someone to stand up, and she had to, or in my case, sit down. So I refused to move. And she adds, people always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. I was not tired physically, no more than I usually am at the end of a working day. I was not old, although some people have indicated or seen me as an image of being old then. I was 42. Well, that's sounding younger over here. No, I was the only thing I was tired of giving in. A lot of ways, Rosanna Parks was an unlikely candidate to make a difference in the world. But when she decided not to give in to that which was unjust, and an unjust request that had been made of her, she wound up changing the world, literally. Some people aren't committed to their faith, even though that they are regular attenders. I remember one time in my very first church, at the beginning of summer, one of the ladies came to me towards the end of June. She says, I'll see you in the fall, see you in September. I said, oh, that's nice. I said, where are you going? Oh, she says, nowhere. I take the summers off, she said. Some people are just auditing the course. They're not committed to being there for God. So why, you ask, why should I? Why should I make that commitment? And I think the best answer to that question is that because God is committed to us first, we need to be committed to God. Let me close with the story of another young doctor who was making the start in his career. His name was Dr. John Richards. And Dr. Richards found that he had a heart problem. Found it early in his career that he would be very susceptible to a fatal heart attack. Being a Christian, he asked his friends to pray for him. His friends did pray for him. He didn't felt the relief that he was hoping to. The idea of having a massive heart attack was too much for him. He really couldn't get over that. He began to feel sorry for him, and as people do when they're in a situation of frustration and perhaps a little bit of hopelessness, he got angry with God. And he writes, how could God let this happen to me now? At the beginning of my career, I worked so hard, I prepared so well to be a good doctor, and now this. It isn't fair, he wrote. And then one morning, as John was feeling sorry for himself, his father, who was a retired doctor himself, came bursting into the room, and he said, John, he says, I have some good news for you. Phone the hospital and tell them that we're on our way to prepare the operating room for both of us right now. And John didn't understand. He said, operate on us, Dad? What on earth are you talking about? You've lost me. He says, what do you mean operate on us? And his father said, John, my career is over and yours is just beginning. I have many great hopes and dreams for you. I've been studying about transplants, and I want us to go to the hospital together today because I want to give you my good heart. Well, obviously, John was stunned by that. They hugged each other tightly, and they cried in each other's arms. It was a powerful moment. But for John, at that moment, his hope was restored. And he stopped feeling sorry for himself. He started looking for a solution to his problem. And his solution wasn't a transplant, but his solution became a heart bypass. And he had that heart bypass, and he went on to be a successful doctor. He didn't need the heart of the Father to be taken from him. And the reason I really like that story is because it gives us an image of our Heavenly Father. God loves each one of us so deeply that he will sacrifice for us, that he would give us his heart. He gave us his Son. When Jesus asked his followers to take up the cross and to follow him, he knew where that would lead. He knew going to Jerusalem where his life would lead and how that would end. He couldn't ask his disciples to give up their life for him if he wasn't prepared to give his life up as well. The Christian faith is not for those who are auditing the course. God means to do great things for us if we're able to give him our hearts. Last week, the question for us was, who do you say that I am? This week's question follows. Are you auditing the course, or are you taking up the cross and following him? Amen. Let's pray. loving God, their world beckons in such different in a variety of ways. It calls us to do things that really are very selfish things, to looking after our own needs. And yet you call us to deny ourselves and to go out into the world, to seek needs out into the world, needs that we can fill. And so we think of the Albert Schweitzers of the world who saw a great need, saw that they had the skill to meet that need, and despite the ridicule, and despite the hardships and the financial sacrifice and the time sacrifice, he's willing to go out and to make that kind of a sacrifice. And we recognize that when we do that kind of thing ourselves, that there's a blessing in it. Not only a future blessing, but a blessing as we do so. And so, Lord, help us to hear your call, to be attentive to your call. Help us to deny ourselves in ways that would benefit your glory and benefit the world. And might we reach out to others in that way that pleases you. In the name of the one who taught us, pray when we gather together, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the